Slight technical hitch there. Thank you very much. My name is Councillor George Farquhar, and I would like to welcome the Charter Trustees, the press and members of the public, including those watching online, to this meeting of the Bournemouth Trustees. Charter Trustees, I should say. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could you follow the following ground rules for speaking. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand physically to indicate. Where there appears to be a consensus in the meeting for a motion, I will ask if there is any discussion. When a formal vote is required, this will be carried out by a show of hands. As a courtesy, I would also ask that you please do not talk amongst yourselves during any debate. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed via the Council's YouTube channel, where the recording will be available for a minimum of 6 months. Before we start with the business on the agenda, I would like to highlight that Charter Trustees is a non-political body with a primary objective of being to maintain and promote the historic and ceremonial traditions of Bournemouth. I'm keen that we all work together to maintain this objective. Before we go on to the first item of business, I'd just like to welcome you all trustees, particularly those that serve in pool trustees as well. The reason I'd like to extend that thank you to you is because we need to be quorate to carry out our business. There was some concern earlier that we might not be quorate. So everybody that actually did an RSVP within the electronic systems, that is immensely helpful to our democratic services and our honorary clerk to ensure that nobody breaks into a sweat because we won't be able to complete the business. But at a short notice, I'm very much obliged to each and every one of you that did so. First item of business, apologies. Can I ask the honorary clerk to read out the apologies?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologies have been received from Councillor Hazel Allen, Councillor Philip Broadhead, Councillor David Brown, Councillor Simon Bull, Councillor Richard Burton, Councillor Sharon Carr-Brown, Councillor Brian Castle, Councillor John Challoner, Councillor Adrian Chapman-Law, Councillor Brian Chick, Councillor David Dawton-Gibson, Councillor Bobby Dove, Councillor Dwayne Farr, Councillor Jeff Hanna, Councillor Rachel Maidment and Councillor Karen Rampton.
From the room itself, are there any other apologies? Councillor Cat.
Reading a list. Sorry. Didn't look.
Don't worry, Councillor Castle. We'll make sure that the minutes reflect the fact that you're physically here in person. Any other apologies from the room? None at all. Declarations of interest. Honorary Clerk, can you report any declarations of interest that have been received?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No declarations have been received, but if anybody does have a declaration, there's a flowchart at the front of the agenda, which if you could follow, that would be helpful.
Moving on to business item number 3, the Charter Trustees 23-24 Internal Audit Report. May I call upon Matt Filmer, our responsible financial officer, to present the report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, Charter Trustees. So there's 3 agenda items today. The first 2 are the internal audit report and the outturn report, and that feeds into the what we call the annual governance and accountability return, which is a statutory return we have to have signed off and approved by the end of this month, and they'll go online for public inspection. So the internal audit report and the outturn report feed into that document. So that'll be the last agenda item that we have to approve. So the internal audit report is dictated in most by that annual governance and accountability return in terms of areas that they look at. But there's probably one area I just wanted to highlight to Trust Trustees, which was what they refer to as the high priority. And that's where we failed to have an asset verification for 23-24 of the Charter Trustees regalia. There are other items that have been picked up. I won't list those, but happy to take any questions in regards to the audit report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Can I open it up to the room for any questions or debate? Councillor Canavan.
Could we just ask for clarification on what's going to happen in relation to the asset verification, please?
Yes, indeed. Thank you greatly.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Canavan. Yes, we have scheduled those asset verifications for post-election, so early July, those will be completed.
Just to add some reassurance, we, for whatever reason, had a a deficit on trustees that were prepared or had the ability and time to come in and help with the audit. Having discovered this, I myself, as the mayor, stepping up to be one of those teams to actually assist on a very accurate audit of the assets which we have. And I would welcome anybody to approach me directly or Democratic Services to join that particular team. Thank you. Any other questions or debate?
Mr. Mayor, can you just remind us of when the audit's going to take place?
I just said after the general election.
The asset verification will be post-election in July. I don't have the exact date to hand, Councillor, but I can confirm if you wish.
Thank you.
Mr. Filmer, would you be prepared to summarise the report, since there doesn't appear to be any other questions or debate?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we're just looking for Charter Trustees to note that report, if possible. Thank you.
Can I move that from the chair that we actually note the report? Can we have a show of hands, please? Any dissension? Thank you very much. That is carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Filmer. Apparently, we're now going to move to the supplemental item number 5, budget outrun report of 2023. We now move to supplemental report published on agenda item 5, which I have agreed to be published in order to provide additional context for the agenda item 4. I call upon Matt Filmer, responsible financial officer, to present the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just apologies, this was a late supplementary item, but it's important that it goes in this order, because the numbers from this outcome report feed into the annual governance and accountability return. So just to summarise the budget for 23-24 and its outturn, the Charter Trustees underspent by just over £18,000. Most of that underspend, or almost entirely, the underspend was what we refer to the variable areas, such as the mayor events and hospitality. 70%, I think, of the Bournemouth Charter Trustees are fixed, so they're fixed charges from the council. So it's all those non-fixed charges where we've seen the underspend for the year. So that underspend has been added to the total reserves for the Charter Trustees, which at the beginning of 2023 were just shy of 91,000, and the carried forward reserves is 103,000. Slightly smaller than the 18,000 underspend. That's because a proportion of the 23-24 budget was to be supported by reserves. So that's why there's a slight difference in terms of what's been used. But Appendix A to that report sets out all the details of the expenditure and the income and the final position. So I'll stop there, Mr. Mayor, but happy to take any questions.
Any questions or debate on the outrun report? Councillor.
I bit naive on my part, and excuse me if this is in the document, but if we underspent by that amount and we've allocated to the reserves for the budget moving forward, does that mean that there's going to be another underspend at the end of the next year? And really, should we be looking at actually sort of taking that out of the reserves and saying, well, let's keep the reserve as it is and put that back into the full council budget where we need the money? Or does that not work like that?
Thank you very much, Councillor Dower. Mr. Filmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll have to just double check the 24-25 budget for the Bournemouth Charter Trustees, but I believe a part of that is to be funded from reserves, and that's normally a fixed amount. So if you assume we spend the budget to the letter, we will draw down that amount of reserves. But if we overspend or underspend, that will change that drawdown of reserves. Okay, and that reserve will then just carry forward every year. It has been picked up in the internal audit report around the level of reserves and the plans to use those reserves. So whether they could fund one-off events, one-off activities, etc. But that's for the Charter Trustees to determine.
Councillor Canavan.
So just following up on that, at what point would we be able to consider using any of that money to offset the precept?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. That would be normally that decision would be taken as part of the budgetary workshops that we have pre January, I think December when we actually hold the preset meeting. So it's for Charter Trustees to decide if they wanted to reduce the preset and offset it by reserves. They can do. It would need to be an unanimous decision, obviously, on that. But bear in mind when you use reserves, they're one-off. So if you to drop the preset 1 year, you may have to increase it the following year. So it's just something to be aware of when you use reserves to support the budget.
Thank you very much, Mr. Filmer. Just before we come to yourself, Councillor Trent, if it adds a little bit of value to the trustees, I attended yesterday, was it, day before, the raising of the flag for Armed Forces Day, and I was speaking to a variety of the association members, the ex-services associations. Just by way of reminder, is that we will be stretching out to recognise such things as victory in Japan, if we have the reserves and we have the assets for it, and also we've got victory in Europe coming up next year. So this, I would anticipate, will be something which will be discussed by the Civic Working Group and put to the trustees to vote on. But I'm very keen to recognise the service of our armed forces in this period, whereby there are a variety of anniversaries coming up, as we saw in the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Please, our Honorary Clerk.
Just one point about the earlier question about the use of reserves. They can only be used for charter trustee purposes. So there is a ring fence around the charter trust and the precept. So they couldn't be used for council services, but they could be used for other things that the trust wants to do.
Any further questions or debate? Councillor Trent, please.
Yeah, it's just a question about use of reserves, because I know that in Pool Charter Trustees, we introduced a grant giving scheme, having done quite a bit of research as to how it would operate, that will eat into the underspend a fair bit if people actually make bids against it. And I'm kind of wondering where the because I know it has to be in support of the traditions of the town and the morality, and I'm kind of wondering whether there would be a benefit in research as to exactly what events such things could support. See, I've got a community event which at the moment is underfinanced. This is albeit in Poole, but it's underfinanced by about £7,000. But I don't, and there's a similar event in Bournemouth that probably isn't underfinanced. But I'm kind of wondering whether there is scope within the rules that govern Charter Trustees to help out some of these things which have a direct effect on individual communities. Because I'm keen for things to happen for people, and providing it's something that the mayor is part of, attends and so on, I kind of think, do we perhaps need to sort of relax a definition enough to be able to support individual events that benefit one or the other of the Charter Trust areas? Yeah, that makes sense.
It does, Councillor Trent, and I certainly believe that it should be explored. But if I could call upon the Honorary Clerk or perhaps Mr. Filmer to sort of say what sort of scope, but it might well be that if there is scope, then it's something that the Civic Working Group could take into consideration. Honorary Clerk. Oh, sorry. Mr. Phil.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. When we looked at that scheme for Poole, I'm sure Richard's probably better versed in terms of the rules, but it can only be used to support the historic Bournemouth events that pre-existed the abolishment of Bournemouth Borough Council. But it's on a case-by-case basis. So I think if it was part of the Civic Working Group or a Charter Trustee wanted to bring it forward, it could be looked at and whether it would be a feasible grant, etc. take forward.
Yeah, if possible, I will use an example, and I don't know how it's set up for the one that takes place in Bournemouth in West Howe, but I'm aware that the what do they call it? It's the Arts by the Sea event they've got one in Bournemouth, one in Poole planned. The one in Poole is short by about £7,000 for the cost of actually putting it on. I don't know what the situation is in the one that's happening in Bournemouth in the West House side, but it doesn't actually support a tradition, but it very much supports the relative community, which is why I was sort of interested in where the definition begins and ends. Because to me, if the Charter Trustees have got a balance unspent, actually being able to support things which are actually benefiting the separate towns and the communities within the towns, but there is this problem that they aren't traditional historical events. There's something which is been.
Thank you very much, Councillor Trent. I think the way to actually deal with this one is that I would encourage you to share your ideas with the honorary clerk and copy us in, and then we can look at the scope of such things within the civic working group. And if I could call upon the honorary clerk to ensure that that's added to the work plan. But I rely on you, Councillor Trent, to use examples such as Arts by the Sea for that sort of scope. I'm getting the impression from Mr. Filmer that it can't go cross-border, but it may well be, and also I'm getting the impression that it might not be that unless it was already established in the borough days of the respective boroughs, that it might not be possible. But I think, would it satisfy you if we ask you to write your idea to the honorary clerk, and then the civic working group can report on that back to the Charter Trustees? Councillor Connolly.
Yeah, just one more question on that, just to check my understanding. So before the next budget round, about December, there's going to be workshops on this. We're obviously going to be wanting to look to whether or not to decrease the precept or to spend these excess reserves somehow. As part of that, could we have some sort of workshop or training session to talk us through what is and isn't allowed? It seems to me, exactly further to Councillor Trent's point, there's obviously plenty of things in the community that we might want to consider. It would be helpful to know what is and isn't on the table. And I'm also thinking about things in the BCP budget that we might want to bring to pay for out of these reserves. If we think that, if there's something needs to be closed or sold, and we think that that is against the interests of Bournemouth, what are the options there for using some of these reserves for that? I don't have a specific example in mind, but I'm thinking something small like a swimming pool, where there might be a case for these reserves being repurposed for that. It would just be helpful ahead of those discussions to know what is and isn't on the table. So some sort of session would be really helpful. Thank you.
I think, Councillor Connolly, that I'm getting nods from the honorary clerk here that that's possible that it can be explored. I would welcome a working group, but obviously the working groups are only as good as the participation of the Charter Trustees that actually attend them, to give us something reasonable for all the Charter Trustees to actually consider prior to the budget setting for next year. If I could just pass this over to the honorary clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, happy to consider that. Well, we have sort of more of a workshop than training, I guess. It's more of a workshop, set out what the parameters are. And we could either do that for the working group or for all the Charter Trustees, maybe hold it as an open meeting. I think that might help in terms of the understanding of what the Charter Trustees are, what the limits are, where those limits can be pushed. And as you say, I think what events previously existed, because the wording is about upholding the civic traditions. That doesn't necessarily mean it was an event that happened last year. You could look at a wider interpretation of those civic traditions. So let's have a look at that and try and work that through with the group.
If I could word that to a proposal or a motion to this group here, so that we can have a vote on the Charter Trustees attending a Charter Trustees work group, so that you can feed in for your wards as regards the side of things. Can you help me out with the wording for that particular proposal? Because I'd like to put it to the vote of this meeting of the Charter Trustees here. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very quickly, Poole Charter Trustees have adopted a grant system. Riding on the back to that for many years, Poole Borough Council did financially assist the Twinning Association. Poole is twinned with Cherbourg. Bournemouth is twinned with two locations. I've can't see any grant was given to twinning in Bournemouth. So two suggestions. It could be that the working party could look at the actual adopted grant scheme that Paul is using, because the offices could obviously double up on that. They could use the same system for Bournemouth, and also twinning in Bournemouth, that is promoting the civic link between the two separate locations, and it's something which is promoting. We financially assisted, because I'm the chair of the Twinning Association, a visit over to Cherbourg only last weekend of an event which otherwise wouldn't have happened, but it was definitely promoting Paul. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Andrews. I think certainly that the Charter Trustees can learn from one another and take the best of, one from the other. But what I'm looking for and what's happening at the moment is just some wording so that we can put together a Charter Trustees working group to explore that. Just a moment, Councillor Trent. Councillor Bartlett at the back. Would you come forward to share somebody's speaker for a microphone, please?
Yeah.
I was going to suggest, Mr. Mayor, that before you start thinking about how much of the reserve to dispense of on grants, etc., you actually consider what expenditure may be coming in the future, because it may be you might have anything to give away. And for example, I know the car is getting pretty ancient, and maybe we should be thinking about investing in a new car. Is there anything else that might be coming up where there are big costs coming up? So I just think we need to be a little bit cautious. Let's look at what we need to spend out before we decide what we can give away. Thank you.
Councillor Bartlett, that's very valuable input, and I'm sure that the working group would take that into consideration, working with our financial responsible officer as regards what unexpected may well be coming down the pike. But I don't see that any reason not to explore the possibility of a grant within the covenant of the Charter Trustees. Councillor Trent.
Yeah, if I can cobble together a proposal that a workshop is arranged for the Charter Trustees of both Bournemouth and Poole to explore the limits and regulations that apply to the activities of the Charter Trust, to see whether we can do more to benefit the constituent towns. Probably needs modifying.
I very much appreciate that, but the honorary clerk, Councillor Trent, has got a little wording together.
Oh, right.
But perhaps
that'll be better than what I've cobbled together.
It was somewhat narrow. I was a little bit concerned for learning from what the Charter Trustees' experiences are for the grant, but staying within the boundaries of the Charter Trustees for Bournemouth, which you sit in both camps. So you have the advantage of bringing that knowledge to that working group. So what I'm looking for is a proposal for that particular working group. Can I just have a little look at the wording of the honorary clerk, and then maybe move it from the chair, and I would seek a seconder. Second right to Councillor Trent. Right, I hope that the honorary clerk has come through. So moving from the chair, that the Charter Trustees agreed to hold a workshop to consider wider options for the use of revenue and reserves fund in support of community events and facilities across the Bournemouth area, and to consider options to work with neighbouring Charter Trustees and parish or town councils. Would that be agreeable if I had a seconder, please? Councillor Trent. So if I could just put it to the meeting, please. So that the Charter Trustees agreed to hold a workshop to consider wider options of the use of revenue and reserves fund in support of community events and facilities across the Bournemouth area, and to consider options to work with neighbouring Charter Trustees and parish and town councils. Can I move that and have a show of hands, please? Any dissension? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. That is carried. Congratulations, greatly received. Any further debate on this particular business item? Mr. Filmer, can you just summarise the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that was a useful discussion, particularly around setting next year's budget. So I would encourage all Charter Trustees to attend that workshop if possible. But this report is just a note, Mr. Mayor. That's all right. Thank you.
So can I be moved that the report is so noted? Show of hands, please. Any dissension? That is carried. Moving on to business item 4, the annual governance statement 2023-24 and statement of accounts for 23-24. I call upon Mr. Filmer, the responsible financial officer, to present the report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is the annual governance and accountability return, which, if approved tonight and signed by the clerk and the chair, will be on the Charter Trustees website by tomorrow, and then the public inspection notice will go live, so members of the public can inspect the documents in regards to the annual governance and accountability return. It basically summarises the previous 2 agenda items that we've noted. The one piece just to highlight, which is in regards to the statement of accounts, which is on the second to last page of the AGAR. It sets out all the outturn figures that were as part of the outturn report, but the new figure that we haven't mentioned is the value of the fixed assets, or the regalia of the Charter Trustees of Bournemouth, and that is 646,000, and that is a reflection of the latest insurance valuation of those assets. Hasn't been done for a couple of years, so it's due, but that value, you wouldn't have seen it previous to this signing of this report. So I'll stop there, Mr. Mayor. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Filmer. Any questions or debate on business item number 4? Councillor Canavan.
Can I just ask how that figure's been arrived at, if you haven't done an asset valuation?
Mr. Filmer.
For you, Mr. Mayor, that's the insurance cover. So if, God forbid, all those assets were burned or destroyed, that would be the value of the insurance claim.
Does that satisfy you, Councillor Canavan?
But it doesn't represent the value. It's purely an arithmetical figure, isn't it, for the purposes of insurance? It doesn't actually value the assets.
Mr. Filmer.
I think I can see what you're getting at, Trustees. The issue with the regalia is what we refer to as a heritage asset, which, similar to things like statues or very historic buildings, they're very hard to value from a RICS perspective, which is the way in which assets are valued. The valuation from the insurance is deemed the most sensible value for those assets by the external auditors. And this AGAR is externally audited. So that gives you some assurance. They will look at that insurance valuation and sign it off on that basis.
Councillor Canavan. Councillor Della.
Thank you. Just a quick question around the actual, the budget and the actuals. Some of them are exactly the same as what we budgeted for, which is incredible. And then the majority of them are under. But there is one that stands out as, I mean, I know it's small things in the scheme of the council's budget, but printing and photocopying. So we estimated 50, and the actual was 284. Do we have any idea why it went up that much?
Would you be best to answer that, Mr. Filmer?
For you, Chair, I can quickly check the spend whilst I'm low. But in regards to your first point, the vast majority of the spend for the Charter Trustees is fixed. It's a charge between the council and the Charter Trustees, 2 separate legal entities. And that's what we set up as part of the budget. And then that's what we invoice the Charter Trustees based on. I forget the percentage it does say in the report, but it's at least 60-70% of all of the budget is fixed. Hence why it's always budget actuals match the same in most cases. In regards to that printing and photocopying, I've got a feeling there was some invites from memory. I'm happy. Perhaps if I could just check, and would that be more sensible? Probably.
Yes, please. It's
Yeah.
just you know for the benefit of everyone. Yeah, I think we'd be able to know.
If I may, Councillor Dower, it's one of the deficiencies that coming in as a new mayor that I've identified myself is that we don't commit to paper. In the digital world, there seems to be a mad rush to have everything. Is there some debate which we need to be aware of? Charter Trustees. Thank you. Just coming back to my point, in the digital world, we seem to be thrusting towards electronic confirmation and everything being held in the cloud and nothing committed to paper. Now, from my perspective, then it doesn't uphold the traditions and history of the Charter Trustees and the Mayor to actually not commit to paper for certain invites and so on and so forth. So it may well be that in the coming budget, that figure will actually go up for printing and stationery, simply because I believe that there is a need for that to go forward. But obviously that budget would go before the Charter Trustees to actually have confirmation. Does that help, Councillor Dow?
Thank you, but it doesn't actually, because for me it's the level of increase. I mean, if we know what it was for, that's great. I know it's only a small amount. I mean, if we budgeted for £3,000 and we spent 3,500, I'd want to know. And if we budgeted for 100 and we spent 300, I'd still want to know why the difference. And that's what I'm asking.
Sorry, I couldn't add value to the Councillor Dow. I think Mr. Filmer now has a more accurate pounds and pence answer for you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I had to double check the accounts in terms of what that spend was. So £263 was spent on booklets for the Remembrance Sunday. It was a number of A5 booklets that were ordered from the reprographics team here at the council, and it was charged to the Charter Trustees.
Councillor Dow.
So the reproduction of booklets wasn't budgeted for in the original budget estimate. Is that what you're saying?
I would like to sort of use the phrase robbing Peter to pay Paul, but if you look at the spreadsheet as a whole as regards the deficit elsewhere, and that might well be the reason why, but it's a valid point which you bring. But to my understanding, spreadsheets, a budget is precisely that. It is an estimate. Sometimes it'll go over and sometimes it'll go under. But Mr. Filmer, could you help out?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in the Bournemouth budget for 23-24, there is a budget for Remembrance Sunday, which was £10,000. But I think what's happened is because the charges come from the council, it's been charged as a printing charge that we count for as a council and then gone to the Charter Trustee. It should really be sat on the Remembrance Sunday line in terms of the outturn position.
Thank you.
If it also helps, the honorary clerk has brought my attention of the budget for Remembrance Sunday, which was 10,000, but the actual spend that was booked onto the budget was £9,078. So I'll leave it to you to make the mental arithmetic how many pounds, pennies and shillings that we might be short on the actual budget.
Thank you.
Any other questions or debate on item 4? Could I ask for a mover from the Charter Trustees? Councillor Williams.
Happily move to adopt.
And a seconder, please. Councillor Beasley. Thank you very much.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Having been so moved, can we have a show of hands, please? Any dissension? That is carried. That now concludes the meeting, but before I formally declare the meeting actually closed, I just once again like to thank each and every Charter Trustee that came here at short notice so that we could stay within the legislation and meet the timetable. I do understand that all of you are somewhat busy elsewhere with other national events that are unfolding as we speak. But once again, I'm very pleased to see such a turnout and also such an active role by members in the business itself. So with no further ado, I formally declare this meeting closed.